Black men in the 1950s carried themselves with a quiet strength that commanded respect without ever demanding it from anyone around them. The life lessons they practiced were not casual suggestions, but requirements passed down from fathers and grandfathers who understood deeply what survival and dignity truly cost a man in this challenging world. These principles shaped how they worked, how they led their families, and how they moved through a world that often denied them the justice they deserved. Here are 30 life lessons Black men lived by in those years that we desperately need to recover and practice today. The first lesson Black men learned in the 1950s was simple: provide for your family no matter what. Providing meant more than bringing home a paycheck. It meant working 2 or 3 jobs if necessary, taking whatever honest work was available, and never complaining about the burden of work and responsibility that rested on your shoulders each day. Fathers demonstrated this through action rather than speeches. They left before dawn and returned after dark, with calloused hands and the quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing duty had been fulfilled. Young men watched their fathers turn down nothing and endure everything because mouths at home needed feeding and families needed stability. Providing meant being present, being reliable, and being the foundation upon which an entire household could stand without fear of collapse or uncertainty about what tomorrow might bring. The saying, "Your word is your bond," was not merely a slogan, it was a complete way of life for Black men in the 1950s who understood what reputation truly meant in their communities. A promise made was a debt that had to be paid, regardless of inconvenience or changed circumstances that arose unexpectedly along the way. Men who broke their word found themselves excluded from community trust, losing access to the networks of mutual aid that made survival possible in difficult times and challenging circumstances. Fathers taught their sons that a handshake was a contract more binding than any paper document could ever be in this world. Your reputation for keeping promises became your most valuable currency in a world designed to discount your worth at every single turn. The lesson, "handle your business before your pleasure," was drilled into young Black men throughout the 1950s with relentless consistency and firm expectations that allowed no exceptions. Chores came before play, obligations before entertainment, and responsibilities before rest and relaxation of any kind. This was not about denying enjoyment, but about establishing the proper order of a well-lived life with priorities correctly arranged. Fathers who had been denied opportunities understood that discipline was the one advantage no one could ever take away from you. Dress like you respect yourself meant that Black men in the 1950s paid careful attention to their appearance, even when resources were scarce and money was tight. A pressed shirt, polished shoes, and clean lines communicated self-regard in a world that often refused to offer external validation. Fathers taught their sons that looking presentable was not vanity, but a clear declaration of inherent dignity. The lesson to control your temper, because anger was a luxury you could not afford, was something Black men in the 1950s learned early and always remembered. In an environment where a display of anger could cost a man his job, his freedom, or even his life, emotional control was not optional but essential for survival. Fathers taught their sons to channel frustration into productive work and to save their fight for the battles that actually mattered. "Never let them see you struggle" was about more than pride for Black men in the 1950s. It was about protecting your family from the vultures who circled difficulty and shielding your children from worry they could not solve. Men carried their burdens privately, solving problems before their families knew problems existed. Keeping your private business private meant that family matters stayed within family walls. In Black households throughout the 1950s, men understood that outside knowledge of your problems could be used as a weapon against you. Fathers taught their sons that a man who cannot keep his own counsel cannot be trusted with anything important. Always have a plan, And a backup plan was the strategic thinking that Black men in the 1950s employed constantly and taught deliberately. In an unpredictable environment where jobs could disappear without warning, having only one path forward was considered foolish. Fathers taught their sons to think steps ahead and to never assume that stability would last. To protect your family with your life was not a metaphor, but a literal expectation for Black men in the 1950s. They understood what was truly at stake. A man stood between his family and any threat, whether that threat came from the street, from hostile institutions, or from economic hardship that could destroy everything they had built. This protective stance was visible in how men positioned themselves when walking with their families, in how they answered doors when strangers knocked, and in how they handled any situation that might put loved ones at risk. The willingness to sacrifice everything for family safety was assumed rather than discussed, because it needed no explanation whatsoever. To say a man's home is his castle was to say that within his own four walls, a Black man in the 1950s exercised the authority and dignity the outside world often denied him. The home was sacred territory, a sanctuary where his word was law and his family could be safe from external disrespect. Fathers maintained this sanctuary fiercely, understanding that children needed to see their father honored somewhere. Teach your sons everything you know was a commitment to generational transfer that Black fathers in the 1950s took seriously as a sacred duty. Skills, wisdom, and survival strategies were passed down through countless hours of working alongside sons, explaining not just what to do, but why it mattered for their futures. Treat your wife like a queen, in public and in private. It meant consistent respect that did not change based on who was watching. Black men in the 1950s who honored their wives openly were modeled examples for their children of what marriage should look like. This extended to never allowing others to disrespect her in your presence under any circumstances. Knowing your neighbors and looking out for them created the networks of mutual support that allowed Black communities to thrive despite external pressures. Black men watched over each other's homes, children, and interests as if they were their own. Fathers taught their sons that community strength came from countless small acts of looking out for one another daily. Supporting Black-owned businesses was economic solidarity that Black men in the 1950s practiced as a matter of principle and community survival. Spending money within the community kept resources circulating among people who would reinvest them locally. Never turning away someone in genuine need was the hospitality that Black communities in the 1950s practiced without hesitation. If a neighbor fell on hard times, you shared what you had without being asked. Standing up when you saw wrong being done was the courage that Black men in the 1950s were expected to demonstrate, regardless of personal cost. Speaking up for the vulnerable and refusing to be silent witnesses to mistreatment were requirements of honorable manhood. Putting God first in everything was the foundation upon which all other principles rested for Black men in the 1950s. Faith was not compartmentalized into Sunday mornings. It was integrated into every decision and into every day, without exception. Church was non-negotiable. That meant Sunday attendance was never optional for Black families in the 1950s, regardless of circumstances. The church provided spiritual nourishment, community connection, and moral instruction that could not be found elsewhere. Giving your tithe before you paid yourself demonstrated trust in divine provision, a practice Black men in the 1950s followed faithfully. That 10% came off the top, before rent, before groceries, before anything else that seemed urgent. Praying over your family daily was the spiritual protection Black fathers in the 1950s provided, consistently and without fail. Morning prayers sent children into the world covered. Evening prayers gathered the family back under divine care. Fasting in hard times was a spiritual discipline that Black men in the 1950s practiced. They set aside physical needs to focus on prayer, demonstrating a faith that solutions come from above. Forgive even when it costs you was the radical grace that Black men in the 1950s lived, despite carrying legitimate grievances. Fathers taught their sons that forgiveness was strength, not weakness. They taught that bitterness poisoned the one who held it. Raising children in the Word meant consistent biblical instruction in Black homes throughout the 1950s. Scripture was read aloud, memorized together, and applied to daily situations as they arose. Leaving an inheritance for your grandchildren required the long-term thinking that Black men in the 1950s embraced, despite limited resources. Every investment, every piece of property held onto, every dollar saved was building toward generations not yet born. Never let circumstances define you was the mental fortitude that Black men in the 1950s cultivated against overwhelming odds that would have crushed lesser spirits entirely. External conditions might limit options, but they could not determine character or extinguish ambition unless a man allowed them to, through surrender or despair. Fathers taught their sons to see obstacles as problems to solve rather than verdicts to accept as final. A man's situation was temporary, but his response to that situation revealed his permanent nature and true character for all to see. Young men learned to carry themselves with the dignity of kings, regardless of what their bank accounts or job titles might suggest to the outside world watching them. This internal freedom was the one treasure that could never be confiscated by anyone under any circumstance, no matter what power they held over you. Dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered, was the truth that Black men in the 1950s repeated to their sons until it became an unshakable conviction, rooted deep in their souls. Others could deny you opportunity, respect, or justice, but they could not reach inside and remove your self-worth, unless you handed it over by your own choice. Fathers demonstrated this through their posture, their speech, and their refusal to be diminished by circumstances designed specifically to crush them. Men who understood this truth walked differently, spoke differently, and raised children who understood their own inherent value without question or doubt. Play the long game and build for generations was the patient perspective that Black men in the 1950s maintained, despite constant pressure for immediate relief and quick solutions to present problems. Every sacrifice made today was an investment in tomorrow that would pay dividends across time. Fathers thought not just about their children, but about grandchildren and great-grandchildren they would never meet. This generational vision gave meaning to daily discipline and transformed ordinary decisions into legacy-building acts of tremendous lasting importance. Respect must be earned and maintained daily. That was the understanding. Reputation required constant attention and vigilance and could never be taken for granted. Black men in the 1950s knew that respect was not achieved once and kept forever. It had to be rebuilt through every interaction and every kept promise, consistently over time. Fathers taught their sons that a single careless moment could destroy what years of faithful conduct had painstakingly constructed. A good name is worth more than money. It was the value system that Black men in the 1950s lived by, and they defended it without compromise or exception. Your name preceded you into rooms you had not yet entered, and it remained behind in rooms you had left long ago. Fathers protected their family names with the same intensity they protected their physical homes. A man who had nothing but his good name still possessed everything that truly mattered in this world. Pass it on, because the lessons die if you keep them to yourself, was the final commandment that Black men in the 1950s honored faithfully as their highest sacred duty. Every principle received carried the obligation of transmission to those who came after. Fathers understood they were not the originators of this wisdom, but links in a chain stretching back generations and forward into futures they would never see. Teaching the next generation was the sacred responsibility that gave all other lessons their ultimate meaning and purpose. These 30 principles shaped Black manhood during a generation that faced obstacles we can barely imagine from our present vantage point today. The men who lived by these lessons built families, communities, and legacies that still stand as testament to their faithfulness and sacrifice. Their wisdom was not preserved in books, but passed down through living example, through quiet conversations on porches and in workshops, through the daily demonstration of character that children absorbed without formal instruction. The world has changed in countless ways since the 1950s, but the core challenges of being a man have not diminished or disappeared. Providing for family, protecting those who depend on you, maintaining dignity under pressure, building for the future, and passing wisdom to the next generation remain the essential tasks of manhood. The methods may adapt to new circumstances, but the principles endure because they address something permanent in human nature and human need. What made these lessons powerful was not their complexity, but their consistency across years and generations. Black men in the 1950s did not merely talk about these principles, they lived them daily until the lessons became invisible, woven so deeply into character that they required no conscious thought. This is how wisdom travels across generations, not through lectures, but through lives that embody what words alone cannot convey. Which of these lessons do you remember most from your own family? Which one does your family need to recover today? Drop a comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so we can keep these memories alive together.